Hi, I'm Jeannie and I'm here from Jimmy Bean's Wool, and behind all these sticky notes here is a great book. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit more about working with hand-dyed yarns. We've done a couple other videos. We did Hand-Dyed Yarns 101 and Hand-Dyed Yarns 102. We're going to call this video Hand-Dyed Techniques. And Lorna Miser, I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she's a wonderful designer. She started Lorna's Laces, which is one of our very favorite hand-dyed yarn companies. Jimmy Bean's Wool and Lorna's Laces basically started together, and we've had a great relationship ever since. And Lorna Miser just put out a book called The Knitter's Guide to Hand-Dyed and Variegated Yarn, and I have had so much fun reading through this. I love hand-dyed yarns. I love what they do. They're unique in the sense that you kind of are surprised when you're working with them. They aren't super predictable like some of the commercially dyed yarns. So using this book, I went through and fiddled and played around, and hopefully you will learn some techniques. Lorna immediately talks about colors in the skein versus knitted colors, and I have some examples that I'm going to hold up in a minute about that very thing, that when you have bought a hand-dyed yarn that's in a hank or in a ball, it can look very different than when you actually knit it. The other thing you need to keep in mind is the number of stitches that you're working with, and are you working in the straight or are you working in the round? So you could knit your gauge swatch, say with 15 or 20 or 30 stitches, and get one look, which would be something similar to this with the pooling. You can see, Siobhan can kind of get up here, you can see this is Lorna's Laces that is in the book. I think this is Rainbow actually, and you can kind of see, I'll tip it a little forward so the glare goes out, but you can see these big pools of color. This is what's called pooling. This is what most of us Lorna's Laces fans really love about the Lorna's Laces. But a little bit later in the video I'm going to go over how you can minimize that look and change the yarn entirely to still enjoy working with the hand-dyed look. So this just gives you an idea that what you're seeing in the hank that you purchase or the ball may not be what it's going to look like knitted up. And also from your swatch to your finished project. If you're doing a sweater with 300 stitches versus your swatch, which maybe only has 30 or 40 stitches, the look of the yarn will be very different. So don't always be surprised by that. But she talks in here about the active colorways, choosing the right knitting technique. She talks about that swatching that I just mentioned to you versus your actual finished piece. So make sure you keep that in mind. She talks about how to use stitch patterns to change the look of your hand-dyed yarns. And right here is a really good example, and I'm not positive which color this is. I have a tendency to want to say that might be Roadside Jerry. I'm not sure.
Oh, it does she uses like other yarns too in the book.
She does. In the book she does talk about other yarns that are in here, but these first few pages are her Lorna's. But you can see in this image the difference the stitch pattern really creates in the look of the yarn. You're still getting the pooling, but because the stitches are raised in that swatch, it gives it a whole different feel. So be creative, you know, don't restrain yourself. Go wild. I mean, gee whiz. So let's go over here. I had a couple other. Making two look like one, and I've knit some swatches that I'm going to talk about. But her swatches are really terrific. Here is Rainbow again from the Lorna's Laces collection. And she's just literally turned these two swatches over. This is one side of the swatch. She's carried two colors of rainbow together. And you can see that one look. And then if you look up here at this swatch up on the top, that's just the other side. So you can see how those colors are blending. It's looking more stripe-like rather than pooling. It's giving an entirely different effect. So you could easily take two fingering weights of the same color, blend them together, different lots, all kinds of different issues that you could solve by doing something like this. Maybe the worsted weight that your pattern calls for, you can't find the right colors, so you take 2 fingering weights, blend them together, put them up on a 7 needle or bigger, and you end up with the yarn that you need for your project, and a whole different look. So I highly recommend The Knitter's Guide to Hand-Dyed Variegated Yarns by Lorna Miser. And then I'm going to show you here some swatches. These are my technique swatches, which I worked on last night for you, and using some of my very favorite hand-dyed yarns. I've got Malintosh and Koigu Painter's Palette here, and these 2 little ones here and here, those are Malintosh exclusively. And this bottom swatch, I had 2 balls. One was very cool and one is very warm. And I just worked 2 rows of one ball and 2 rows of another. And every time I came back to the beginning where the balls began, I just carried those yarns up the side. Then the second swatch, you can see, and we did talk about these 2 swatches very specifically in our Knitting with Hand-Dyed Yarns 102, so you can check those out. But this, I just stranded those 2 different color filigree sock weight yarns together, and I used a US 7 and got about a worsted weight gauge. And you can see how different that looks from there to there. It really does look very different. This is subtler color changes, where this is a little more drastic, but it blends the warm and the cool of 2 different balls together very well. Then when we move up here, I had just finished a pair of Turkish bed socks from Church Mouse, and I used Koigu color P344, and so I decided, gee, let's see what happens if you blend those. I'm still on the US 7 needle, and so I did. I took the P344 and blended it with the filigree and the sock weight yarn, and this is the result. So this swatch here is 2 strands carried together, just knit and stockinette, and on a US 7, and you can see how the Koigu, the little spots of the Koigu come through, but the filigree still blends really nice. Gives a whole different, more of a kind of spotty effect, a real pretty, just a completely different look. So that's what I'm hoping you can take away from this video, is being fearless. Just go for it. Blend yarns. These are 2 completely different brands of yarn. They're both hand-dyed, hand-painted yarns, and blending them together gave me an entirely different effect. So then I came up here and I used the Koigu P344, and I used the filigree and the sock weight, and I did my 2 rows at once, 2 rows of one and 2 rows of another, and got an entirely different effect yet again. You can kind of see, I used the cooler ball of the filigree, and you can kind of see that coolness coming through, and yet the warmth of the Koigu. So here you go. Maybe you have some stash yarns, maybe you did a pair of socks and you have a couple balls of different kinds. Why not use them together to create a whole different look? So these are hand-dyed yarns. We've got 2 more little swatches. I am getting ready to do, I don't even know what color that is. I know you guys are going to ask me. Do another pair of the Turkish bed socks in another color of Koigu, and while I was at it, swatching away, I decided, well, let's blend those 2 colors. So I have my 2 colors, the one from my recent finished pair of bed socks and the one coming up, and I worked them together on the US 7, and I really got stoked about the results. It's something I had never actually tried myself, and I thought, well, since I'm talking about it, let's walk the walk and give it a try, and I really, really like this result. This is something I'm going to play a lot with. So then, before I finished my swatch, I decided, well, here we have 2 completely different colors in the same yarn, and I thought, let's give it a try. We'll do 2 rows of one and 2 rows of another, and I really like this result very much. These 2 swatches are exclusively Koigu. These 2 are 2 different colors worked together, double-stranded, and this swatch up here is 2 rows of one and 2 rows of another worked together. So what I want you to come away with is be fearless. Use what you have. These hand-dyed yarns are absolutely scrumptious. They're wonderful to work with. The artists who dye them are amazing. But you might find a few little differences. So go with it. Let that be the star of your piece. Rather than, getting nervous, well, they're really that extreme. Work with it, play with it, make them work together. So I'm Jeannie, I'm here from Jimmy Bean's Wool, and I hope you've enjoyed our 3 videos on working with hand-dyed yarns. Happy knitting. Bye.
Thunder rumbles on this American summer night. There's kids on the corner stuck in a switchblade fight, and the rock and roll bands play for the girls.